they say you should always have an updated resume, but the reality is most of us don't think about updating our resume until we're ready to make that move with our jobs. But it is something that you can always kind of be thinking about, and a resume is sort of always a work in progress. So what I'm hoping to do with you in this webinar today is to give you, as I said, an overview. And then, of course, you're welcome to follow up with me in a one-on-one session as UC Davis employees. As some of you may know, some of you may not know, one of the benefits that you have is that you can see a career counselor twice a year for free. So that is something that you can come and work with me on your resume or interviewing or anything else related to your career. And you would just need to call staff development and get that appointment scheduled. And as I said, you can have 2 of those per each fiscal year. So that's a nice resource. So hopefully this will give you a little bit of background today, and I'm going to go over some things and point out some resources. And then, as I said, feel free to follow up with me afterwards in an appointment. So let's jump right into things. Oh, and I should say that if you have questions as we go through this, feel free to submit those through the chat function. You can do that. And Carmen, who's on the line with us today as well, she'll be monitoring those, and we'll get to those at the end and try to handle as many as we can. We will take some pauses throughout the webinar today to take some questions as well. So rest assured that we're getting your questions. So let's dive into this and talk a little bit about some of the keys to a winning resume. The first real important aspect of creating a winning resume is to really understand the position that you're applying for. While a resume is certainly built on your past experiences, the goal of it is really for it to serve as a marketing piece for the job that you're applying for. So reading through that job announcement, understanding what they're looking for, and then making sure to the degree that you can that the important points of the job requirements are reflected in your resume is going to be very helpful in achieving the goal of your resume, which is to get you an interview. So really understanding the position is a key component. At UC Davis, when you're looking at those UC Davis job announcements, the things that are outlined in the minimum requirements, that's really what HR is screening for. And only if you make it really clear in your application materials that you meet those minimum requirements, only then are you going to be forwarded to the department. So, of course, you want to make special note of those, but also look at the preferred requirements as well. And then once you understand the position, then you really want to look at how do your experience, skills, and accomplishments relate to that. So if, as you're going through that job announcement, you're thinking, gee, I can do that, I've done that, you're kind of running through in your mind, clicking off the things that you meet in the job announcement, then you really want to think about what would be your proof point. What would be the example that would show somebody that you've done that? And then those are items that you're going to want to make sure to outline in your resume. The other thing you want to do is to choose the format that presents you best, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the webinar. But is a chronological format best for you? Is a functional format best for you? Or some hybrid of the two? Then you also want to customize your resume for each position. And I know sometimes people are hoping this isn't the case and they can just create a resume and be done with it and submit that for every job that they apply for. But employers, both in and outside of the university, are really expecting that you're tweaking your resume a little bit each time depending on the position. So if it's an admin assistant position, those can run the gamut from one being completely focused on providing scheduling and executive support to a director, and some can be all about processing payroll. So you would want to tweak your resume to highlight those areas depending on the specifics of the position. You also want to include a summary of qualifications section, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we move through the webinar. But that summary of qualifications section kind of serves as an introduction to your background, sort of like a movie trailer, if you will, that presents all the best parts and makes someone say, hey, I should keep reading this resume, or in the case of as a movie trailer, I really want to go see that movie. So that's what your summary of qualifications is hoping to do for you. Kind of replaces what we used to put as an objective. You don't really need to put the objective on your resume anymore. Save that space for the summary of qualifications. So I'll move to the next slide here to finish up the keys to a winning resume. You also want your resume to include accomplishment statements. And again, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about what those look like. But accomplishment statements would be the bullet points under each of your jobs that you include on your resume. And these would be things that really say what you've done in the job. So rather than those bullet points just simply being a rewrite of your job description, we really want them to be, what did you actually accomplish on that job? And if any of you have to write summaries of accomplishments for your evaluations, your annual evaluations, those things that you include on your summary of evaluations can be good starting points for those accomplishments. Another key to a winning resume is to try to be as consistent as possible with the use of fonts and bullets and some of your formatting. While there are some formatting things that you want to do to make things stand out, you don't want to get too crazy with it and using all sorts of different fonts and highlighting things all throughout your resume and getting too complicated with the bullets that you're using, because that can just be distracting from the actual content itself. So there are some guidelines for font size and fonts. Good fonts to use are Calibri or Arial. And usually in terms of font size, for the main text of your resume, you can do 11 point if you're using one of those fonts that I mentioned. At the same point, your name and headers on the resume for various sections, you might use something like 12, or maybe even for your name, you might use a 14-point font. The goal in general is to make it easy to read. So plenty of white space, making, underlining where it helps to make breaks between different sections, that type of thing. You don't want to try to cram too much on your resume just so you get it all on there, but nobody really wants to read it because it's not too friendly. People always ask about whether it's necessary or required to stick to one page. And I can tell you that in most cases, a 2-page resume is completely fine. That's really kind of the standard if you've had any length of work experience. So that sometimes helps people feel a little less stressed out about trying to throw everything onto one page. 2 pages gives you enough space to really do yourself justice about what your experience has been, and also give things a little bit of breathing room so that it's easier to read. You'll notice there at the bottom of this slide there is a link there to the Career Management Online Toolkit, and this gives you a number of examples. In the section, in the Taking Action section, there are resume examples and ideas, and that's kind of a good first place to go when you're going to start working on your resume, so that you can get kind of a big picture idea of what you're looking for in terms of a final product. There's even some templates there that you can use. I will caution you against some of the templates that you can find on Word. While they can be very graphically pleasing and that kind of thing, they can sometimes force you to have to include sections and things like that that you don't want to include, and can sometimes be hard to make changes to going forward. But you can try those out. I have heard also from a number of clients, which was interesting to me, that now on Etsy there are quite a few resume templates that you can purchase off of Etsy, and I've looked at some of those, and they're quite visually appealing. So if that's your thing, you might want to take a look at that, but just be cautious that sometimes they can lock you into having to do some things that might not fit for your background and experience. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about resume formats. There's kind of two basic formats. The first is chronological, and the chronological format would be when you list your most recent job first and then you go back chronologically. Typically, we go back about 10 to 15 years of experience, unless there's something further back in your resume that would be particularly relevant. At the same time, if what's particularly relevant is 20 years ago, and you don't want to list every job that you had between now and then there are some other ways that you can bring that experience onto your resume. For example, you might list the last couple of jobs that you've had, if that takes you back 10 years or so, and then that job that you had 20 years ago that's might be relevant, you might just write a line that says previous work experience includes positions held in banking, say, something like that, if it was relevant. So, and chronological, I would say, is the preferred format for employers. It's what they would ideally like to see. It's easy to follow, that type of thing. And a chronological resume is good when your work experience is pretty much in line with the type of job you're going to be applying for, or you don't have a lot of gaps in your work history, that type of thing. At the same point, for many of us, our career paths have not been in such a straight line, and we have had gaps in employment, whether that be for layoffs during the recession, or caring for aging parents, or raising children, those kind of things. So sometimes it's not such a neat chronological trajectory that we've been on. In those cases, a functional resume might be a better fit for you. And a functional resume, instead of putting the focus on your most recent jobs and going back chronologically, you put the emphasis on your skill sets. So in either case, chronological or functional, you would have a summary section still at the top. But then with a functional format, instead of jumping into your most recent job, you would have some skill areas. So you might have event planning, employee supervision, and financial analysis. Maybe those are your three functional areas. Those functional areas would be dependent on the job you're applying for. So you might, you'd want to customize those to what are the functional areas of the job that you're applying for. And then with a functional resume, you would still need to include a work history, but that work history would just be your job title, the employer, the location, and the dates of employment. And there are samples of both chronological and functional resumes on the Career Management Toolkit website, that link that was on the previous slide. So you can go and take a look at what some of those look like. Then the third option would be kind of a hybrid of the two. And sometimes that works well. Let's say you've been in a similar job for the last 15 years, or maybe you've really only had one or two jobs and they're quite similar. Then you could list that chronologically, but then within that chronological listing, you could have some functional categories that you would put bullet points under. So those are the three basic formats, and as I said, there's some good examples of those on that Career Management Toolkit website. So at this point, I'm going to take a quick pause here and check in with Carmen and see if there have been any particular questions that we might want to address at this particular time.
The only question we had is folks are wondering if this webinar is being recorded and made available to view in the future, and the answer is yes, we will. It is being recorded, and in the future we will post on our Career Catalyst webpage and under archives, and so this will be available, I would say, within the next week. So look out for that, and that was the only other question.
Okay, terrific. Great. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about the heading on your resume. So, and there's a variety of examples there. The good thing, I guess, and the bad thing about resumes is that there's no one right way to do your resume. Maybe it would be nice if we all had to do it exactly the same way, and that would take all the mystery out of it. But the good part about not having everyone having to do it the same way is that you can really present your background and experience in the way that's going to put you in the best light for whatever position you're going to apply for. So you'll see here there's a variety of different ways that you might lay out your heading for your resume, but some key pieces that definitely need to be there. Obviously, your name. If you have some certifications that are particularly relevant for your field, if you're an RN, if you have CFRE for fundraising, those kind of things. If you have an MBA and you're applying for, a budget manager position, then, you could certainly put those kind of things, those kind of letters after your name. But basically, you do want to have your name. You want to have your city and state. Having your actual address has become kind of an optional item these days. Resumes are a little bit like fashion. Things come and go, and it's a little more in fashion these days, probably with all the privacy concerns, to not have your actual address. But definitely you would want to have a city and state. Obviously your phone number, and a phone number that has a professional voicemail attached to it, that if someone answers it, that you're actually going to get the message, and that, your kids aren't going to tell you 3 days later, oh yeah, there was this person who called for you. So a good phone number, your professional email, and make sure that it's professional, not, I love puppies at gmail.com, but something that connotes a professional image. If you're applying for jobs on campus, it is totally fine to use your UC Davis email. If you're applying for jobs outside of the university, I would recommend that you use your personal email, because employers probably would like to think that you're not the kind of person who would be looking for work on your employer's time, looking for work outside of your own employer on your employer's time. And if you're on LinkedIn, which you likely should be, if you're on LinkedIn, then putting your LinkedIn URL, as long as your LinkedIn profile is up to date, and that's a topic for another webinar or workshop. But if your LinkedIn profile is up to date, then having your LinkedIn in your header is also a good idea. So any questions about the header specifically? I'll give Carmen a chance to respond if she sees anything there.
No questions.
Okay, great. We'll keep plugging along here then. So after your header would be your summary of qualifications. And this is maybe a new concept to some of you, but this would go at the top of your resume. Oftentimes people put their education at the top of your resume, but in almost all cases, your education and training can go at the end of your resume. The exception to that would be if you're applying for positions in academia, if you're applying for faculty positions, that kind of thing, then you're doing more of a CV, and that would come at the top. But otherwise, the summary of qualifications is what should come at the beginning of your resume. And this section really answers the question, why should we hire you? As I said, it's somewhat like a movie trailer. You want to touch on all the good stuff. You want to have it be a little bit of an appetizer so that when the employer reads this, and this is probably one of the first things they're going to read on your resume, is that they get enough information there that they say, hey, I should keep reading this, or this is someone that I'm probably likely going to want to sit down and talk to and get a little bit more information. So typically this is going to be 5 to 7 bullet points that really show that you can do the job. Now, oftentimes people have a tendency for their summary to say mostly things about soft skills, that they're reliable, that they're dependable, that they have good communication skills, that they're a good team player. And those are all wonderful things, but the employer is not going to hire you unless you can actually do the tasks that are related to the job. So if you're going to put 6 bullet points in your summary, 4 of them should show the employer that you can actually do the tasks associated with the job. And then you can add a couple of them that speak to, that you're great to work with and that you have a passion for the topic or the work and that kind of thing. But you've got to make sure that they can see that that you can actually do the job. So after your summary, then you're going to, if you're doing a chronological resume, or if you're doing a functional resume, if you're doing a chronological resume, you're going to be listing your most recent employer, location, not like actual address, but Davis, California, or Woodland, or whatever it might be, and the dates of employment. And then under each of those, you're going to have some bullet points. And again, whether it's under the job title itself, or you're doing a functional resume and you're doing skill categories, either way, you're going to want to have these accomplishment statements. And each accomplishment statement is going to focus on one specific action and the outcome. You're going to start those with an action verb. So, established, coordinated, led, and you can, in analyzing the job description that you're applying for, you can mirror some of those key words that are in the job description in your resume. So you usually probably have heard people talk about your resume needs to include those key words. Well, that's where you're going to get them. They're not some kind of mystery words. They're just the words that you see being highlighted in the resume. With these accomplishment statements, you want to quantify them whenever possible. So if you're saying that you oversee and you do all the payroll for your department, you want to let them know how many people you're processing payroll for, so that they can the employer can get a sense of the size and scope of what you're doing. Now, if you're processing payroll for 75 people every month, that's a great number to include. If you're processing payroll for 2 people every month, then you might just say that you process payroll for all employees. So use those numbers when they're to your advantage. And it is important in the accomplishment statements to include some kind of measurement if there is one. So let's take processing payroll. So what's important to show that you do a good job with processing payroll would be getting it done consistently on time, with minimal errors, if any errors at all, and maybe resolving any discrepancies. So that's some of the language you might use in terms of the outcomes. If you're doing something in sales, which we don't have a lot of at UC Davis, development is somewhat like that, then, it's easy to think of what the outcome is. How much did you raise revenue by? How many more donations did you get? And so you would want to include those kind of figures. But in many other jobs, there are some outcomes. If you're doing training, what kind of evaluations have you gotten? If you're working with students, what kind of participation have you been able to get in terms of if you're doing workshops, things like that. So think about, for your own work, the type of work that you do, how do people measure whether you're doing a good job or not? and how have you done in standing up to those measurements. And again, that's where the accomplishment statements from your annual evaluations may be helpful for you in developing some of these accomplishment statements. Usually these are maybe 1 to 2 sentences long and, a line or two on your resume. One of the good things about working on creating accomplishment statements for your resume is that this is really helping to prepare you for the interview as well, because the things that you think of that you're going to write accomplishment statements and include on your resume, those are some of the same things that you'll want to include when you're interviewing as some of the examples. And there are examples of accomplishment statements in that online career management toolkit. One of the sections there will give you examples of how these are written, and it will give you some questions that you can begin asking yourself to get yourself thinking about, what have I accomplished on the job? Because many of us, we just think, well, I don't really know what I've accomplished. I go in every day, I do a good job, but, where am I moving the needle? But, you may have created a new form. You may have come up with a better system for doing something that has helped save the department energy, or save the department time, or save the department money, some of those kind of things. So those are some things you can think about, and those examples in the career management toolkit will help you with that. Carmen, any questions coming in on what we've been through so far?
No questions at this time.
Okay, good. So another section after you've done your summary, you've worked on your work experience, whether it's chronological or whether you're presenting that more in terms of skills, and then having a section on work history. Then the next area is education and training. You do want to list any formal education that you have. List that first. So that would be any college that you've completed. If you've completed college, there's no reason to list high school unless it would be somehow significant, like, you're applying for a job at that high school. Then that might be a good thing to include, that you're a graduate. But otherwise, any college, whether it be graduate school, undergrad, AA, list that first. And then you would list any significant training that you've completed that's related to the position. We really always want to think about what we're putting on our resume filtered through the position that we're applying for. So if you've done a bunch of training that doesn't relate to the job, then don't clutter up your resume with that. But if you have done some things that might be related to the position, then go ahead and put that on there. And that might include, anything that's related to communication or working with other people, that kind of thing, even though, it might not be subject specific to the position. But, think about what you've taken through any staff development courses or any outside training that you've done. And it is okay to list items that are in progress. So if you happen to be working through the classes towards the preparing for supervision certificate through staff development, then you can go ahead and put that certificate on your resume and just in parentheses after that say in progress. And if you know it's in progress and you expect to complete the certification in April of 2019, then go ahead and put that on there as well. And that goes for any formal education that you might be doing. If you're working on completing your bachelor's degree or your AA degree, you can go ahead and put that on your resume and just put in progress and an expected graduation date. And think about, any classes that you've taken through not only staff development, but UC Davis Extension. If there's any specific training that might be related to your position, such as having CPR training or forklift training or, hazardous materials training, those kind of things, then you would definitely want to have that included in your education and training section. So any questions about that? Anything coming in, Carmen, on that or anything else that we've touched on so far?
No questions.
Okay. Great. It's a quiet group.
Quiet group
They're
today.
just
Yeah.
absorbing, and we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So other sections that you may have on your resume might include honors and awards, and that might be something that you received through your department. It could be something that you received through your education. So if you graduated cum laude, or if you received a scholarship in school, or if you won a department excellence award, something like that, that might be something, that might be a section that you would include on your resume. Another section that you might have is volunteer service, or sometimes this section might be called volunteer leadership. It might also be called campus and community service. So if, let's say, you're involved on campus with staff assembly, and you help out on a committee, or you've been a volunteer for the TGFS event, those are the kinds of things that you might include under volunteer service. Sometimes, depending on where we're trying to take our careers, sometimes what we've done in our volunteer work is very significant to where we're trying to go with our careers. So if we're trying to move from doing events to being more focused on an accounting position, but we really haven't had much accounting experience in our paid work, but in our volunteer life, we're the treasurer of our kids' soccer league, or we do all the bookkeeping for a, you know, a friend's small business as a volunteer, then those are things that you would definitely want to highlight in the volunteer service. Not only that you would want to, in your summary of qualifications, you would want to highlight that you have that background. So then you might spend a little bit more time in your volunteer service outlining those kind of things. But that volunteer service section can not only help bring up skills that might be relevant to the job that you're applying for, but it may also help just to kind of round you out as a person and show that you're that you're community minded. So those are some ways that you can use that volunteer service section. The other section that you might have is military service. So again, that's just another way to give someone a broader view of your background and your commitment to service. So listing your military service is always a good idea, and sometimes it's that, again, what we did in the military that may bring some skills that are relevant to the type of work that you're looking for. The other section that you might have is something called professional affiliations or memberships. And that would be, if you're in fundraising, are you a member of CASE? Which people in fundraising will know what that is. That's the association related to that. If you're, in event planning, are you a member of Meeting Planners International? Things like that. So if those professional affiliations are relevant to the job that you're applying for, then that is something that you would probably want to list on your resume. So Carmen, any questions coming in at this point?
No questions.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes that people make on their resume. So one of the things that people have a tendency to do is just kind of have one basic resume, kind of a generic resume that lists what they've done. Oftentimes it's reads a little bit more like they've cut and pasted their job description into their resume. And people will say, oh, I just always turn in the same resume, but I tweak my cover letter a little bit. But the problem with that is that we really don't know what the employer is going to look at first. What is that first impression they're going to get? And in talking with recruiters both on and off campus, it varies widely. Some folks will actually read your cover letter first, then look at your resume, and then look at your application. But maybe 30% do that, 30% look at your resume first, then read the application, and then maybe read your cover letter if they think you might be a good match. Or if you're wildly not a match, they might read your cover letter to try to figure out why you thought you were qualified for that particular job. So as I said in the beginning, you really want to focus and customize your resume for each particular job. It doesn't mean that you have to start with a blank piece of paper each time, but it does mean that you have sort of your master document, and then that you read that job description and you figure out what is it they're looking for and make sure that you're hitting on those things in your resume, and that you're removing the things from your resume that aren't relevant. Because if you just throw everything in there, then it's hard for people to focus in on the important stuff. So you do want to be tweaking it each time. Another common mistake is to have too much formatting, too many bullet points, too many bells and whistles in your resume that can be distracting. And, people are always wondering, what's going to make my resume stand out? Should I put a picture? Which don't put a picture. But, what should I do to make it, stand out from the pile? Well, what's really going to make it stand out from the pile isn't, any kind of fancy formatting necessarily. What's really going to make it stand out from the pile are those accomplishment statements that really focus in on things that are relevant to the job, that shows somebody what you've done for past employers, how you've made a difference in the workplaces that you've been in, and therefore they can assume that you'll be that kind of employee and you'll make those kind of things happen in their workplace. So that's what's going to make your resume stand out, not some particular formatting. Resumes don't use personal pronouns, so we don't use I or my in resumes, which oftentimes makes grammar check very unhappy. But and I don't really know, I've never been able to really in all the research I've done, I've never been really able to figure out where the genesis of this was with resumes, but we just don't use those personal pronouns in resumes. Abbreviations or acronyms are something to be a little bit cautious about in resumes. In some cases, it's fine to use abbreviations or acronyms in the sense that, and certainly within UC Davis, within your own department, it might be okay to use some abbreviations and acronyms to show that you know how we talk about things, either on campus or in your field. But you really want to make sure that you're not using abbreviations or acronyms that others won't know what that means. And at UC Davis, we have lots of different acronyms that we throw around. So if you're applying on the outside of the university, you want to make sure that those are going to be understood, or you want to spell them out so that you're not confusing folks with things. You don't want your resume to be too crowded, and maybe by knowing that you can have 2 pages, that will help you. But, sometimes people use a teeny tiny font to try to get everything on 1 page, but that doesn't put out a good impression, and someone's going to look at that and say, oh, I don't want to read that. That's going to be too hard. So you do want to have, some breathing space, some white space, so that your resume looks appealing and inviting. Try not to use an inconsistent verb tense. So remember, on those accomplishment statements, I said that they should all start with an action verb. So for your current position, if you're currently in that position, it's okay to use present tense. So you can say coordinate, communicate, train, schedule, reconcile, those kind of present tense verbs. But for any past positions, be sure to be consistent in using past tense verbs and starting that out. So communicated, scheduled, planned, those kind of things. That makes it a little bit easier for someone to follow. Try not to use repetitive words. So again, you don't want to say that you coordinated. You don't want every bullet point to start out with coordinated. And in that online career management toolkit, there is a list of action words. So once you do your resume and you look and see, oh gosh, I said coordinated 18 times on my resume, I'm going to go back and I'm going to use some different words. I'm going to use planned. I'm going to use established. I'm going to use, a few other things. So not only does it make your resume more interesting to read, but it also brings in some additional skills. Another mistake that sometimes people make is not sending their resume as a PDF. So once you get your resume set, you want to save it as a PDF, and you always want to upload it or attach it to an email when you're actually applying to a job as a PDF. That way you know that the way it's formatted is what someone is going to see on the other side. If you send it as a Word document, if they're on a different system or, things just happen in cyberspace and formatting gets messed up, bullet points that you think look beautiful come out as Chinese characters, or I've had them show up as little mailbox images. So you want to make sure that what you're sending is what they get on the other side. So be sure to send things as a PDF. That goes for not only your resume, but your cover letter or any other documents that you might be uploading. Try to avoid fads and gimmicks. As I said, there was a time when people thought it was great to put a picture or, things like that. Try to avoid that. The only thing I would say that you can include, depending on, the job that you're applying for, but let's say you're a web developer and you're applying for a web developer position, then having some links in your resume that link someone to websites that you've designed, that would be a great idea. You just want to make sure that those links are working and that the website on the other end is still up and running. So, but try to avoid other fads and gimmicks. Of course, you don't want to put any false information on your resume. That kind of goes without saying. There's lots of reasons why you may have a gap in your employment. There's lots of reasons why you may never have been able to finish your bachelor's degree. And those kind of things can be explained. And those are the kind of things that if you come and see me in an individual appointment, we could discuss the specifics of how to address that on a resume or in a cover letter. But, there's kind of no explanation for being dishonest or having a lack of integrity. So when you run across that with an employer, it can be, very difficult. So, let's deal with whatever you think the concern is in terms of those kind of things as we develop your resume, and not after the fact when somebody does a degree check or a reference check and finds out you haven't put correct information on your resume. I already talked a little bit about resume templates and why sometimes those can be problematic. You can look at them for ideas and try to repeat some of the things they have, but they can be a little bit challenging at times. And of course, you don't want any spelling or grammar errors on your resume. And you'll see that note there, not to rely on spell check alone. Sometimes the word will be spelled right, but it is not the right word. Things like there and there. So you do want to not only double check it carefully yourself, but maybe have someone else check it before you turn it in. If you've been working on you're going to apply for a job, you've been working on your resume all day, you've been reading through it, you've been double checking it, and then you think you have it all set, but you've been looking at it so much that, sometimes you'll just breeze over things. So have someone else look at it who isn't familiar with it to double check that spelling and grammar. And don't forget to spell check your email and your phone number. Lots of times people overlook that, and then they realize that they've transposed a number in their phone number, and they can't, they don't know why they haven't been getting any phone calls for jobs that they've applied to. Well, their phone number's wrong on their resume, so you want to avoid that one. Any questions about any of these? Carmen, anything coming up on these or anything else?
No questions so far.
Okay, great. So that's those are kind of the points that I wanted to cover with you. I'm happy to answer any general questions that you have. And I know Carmen has a few things she wants to mention, but in our last few minutes here, again, happy to answer any questions you have about the information that was presented, or if you have any specific questions about your particular resume, something that you've heard that you should or shouldn't do with your resume that you want to double check and ask about. Carmen, I'll let you take the lead on any questions that might be coming in to let me know what those might be.
Okay, I don't see any questions coming in through chat.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I know you had a couple of slides that you wanted to share on some things.
Mm-hmm. And so, okay.
Do I need to do something so that, or you'll just switch to sharing your computer?
Yeah, I believe that's what I'll do.
And thanks so much, everyone, for listening and for joining us on this. I really encourage you to check out that career management handbook, which is on the staff development website. If you go to the staff development website, one of the areas that you can look at is toolkits. And if you go to the career management toolkit, there's lots of good stuff in there, but in particular with regard to resumes, if you go to the take action section, then there is information there on resumes. And that's where you can find the samples and the action words and information on writing those accomplishment statements. So it will give you a lot of great stuff. And you can take a look at all of that. And then definitely I encourage you to come in and see me. Bring your resume in whatever format it might be in, and we can give it I can give it a review and give you some tips.
Okay, I would just like to thank each and every one of you for attending and participating in today's webinar. Here on the screen, you'd see our email address. If you would like to receive future news about Career Catalyst events, send us an email and we'll add you to the list. Also, Andrea mentioned being able to see her for career counseling services on a one-on-one basis. Each employee or staff member are eligible for 2 appointments per year. And so on this screen, you see the information and contact person or people that you can connect with to schedule an appointment. And so you see that there are 2 contacts, one for UC Davis campus in Davis and the other for UC Davis Health in Sacramento.
Yeah, and Judy's wonderful too. If you're over at the Med Center, she's a really valuable resource and knows a lot about what's going on over there in terms of jobs and what hiring folks are looking for in terms of resumes and that kind of thing. So she's a great resource over there as well.
Okay, so I don't see any questions here. So this will conclude the webinar for today. And again, thank you for attending.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Carmen, for handling all the technical aspects. Appreciate that. And I hope to see some of you in individual counseling. If you'd like to make an appointment, just give Carmen a call and she'll get you all set up.
Yes, thanks, Andrea.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
afternoon.